everyone, let's go ahead and get started with materials. First and foremost, you're going to need one of my patterns printed off on Sulky Stick and Stitch. If you've purchased a kit, all of this will be included already, so you can just skip ahead to the next part. But if you've never seen this before, this is Sulky Stick and Stitch. It is a water-soluble paper, and it peels off just like a sticker, and this part adheres to your garment, so you can stitch directly over the paper, and once you're done embroidering, it washes clean with water, so you're left with just your embroidery. It's super cool, and the best part about it is you can print this in any standard printer, and it'll print off beautiful images like this. So this is all you need. Again, if you have the kit, this will all come in it, or I will have all of the materials linked down below. Again, this also comes as a kit like this. I've just cut it off. That way you have a few extra symbols at the bottom to look at as we're embroidering. Next, you're going to need a garment of some sort. I am going to use one of my sweaters from my own brand, but any knit garment will work. You could also use a blanket, a denim jacket, Santa kits or like Santa sacks, anything will work. Next, you're going to need yarn. This is a weight 4 yarn. And if you don't know how to check for weight 4, you're going to look on the back of your yarn skein and there will be a little spool of yarn that says weight 4. Let me go get one. So right here on the back, I have this little skein. It says medium 4. That is exactly what you want. I do always use 100% acrylic for these projects. I have a reason behind that, but if you want to use cotton or merino wool, feel free to go ahead. I just find the best results come from acrylic, so that's what I like to stick with. Not necessary for this pattern, but it does come in handy, is a water-soluble marker. I like the brand Chaco, and I have this here. Or you could also use a water-soluble marker from Crayola. Just make sure it says washable on it. And then last but not least, you're going to need a needle. These are called large eye tapestry needles. Large eye means that this part here is nice and large so you can fit the yarn through it. And you're going to want to make sure they have a nice sharp point to get through the sulky. That's always the biggest complaint with people, is getting through the sulky, so make sure your point is nice and sharp. I do have some beads over here. I'm not sure if we're going to use them, but I do think it might be fun to add some beads to the trees, but sometimes when these are going on kids' jackets or sweaters, I get a little concerned doing beads. So I have them here just to show you, but just keep that in mind that it is kind of a risk to put beads on it, especially if it's not going to your child. But either way, with that being said, let's get started. So I have my sweater laid out here, and I'm going to show you a quick tip for finding the center of your garment. I mean, the first one is you could always fold it over collar to collar and kind of mark it off. But what I like to do is I like to count these ridges on the sweater until you get to an even number in the center. I'm going to just kind of approximate where I think the center is going to be, and then I'm going to count out from there. 15, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 14. Okay. So this is the approximate center, so I'm just going to mark that off, and then we can go ahead and get started. I like to make sure that my templates are about 1 inch away from the top, but if you're working on something like a newborn sweater, you may have to inch it up so that it's not too low on the body. I always say higher up on the body is going to be better than it being low on their belly, but I like to do at least 1 inch, especially for these older kids. This is a 4T, so I'm going to go with the 1 inch. And all of my patterns come with this little line to mark off the center of the template. But if for some reason you don't have that, or you're doing a different template, you can always just fold it in half to get that center crease. We're going to go ahead and peel this sticker off now, making sure that it doesn't stick to itself. Be better than me. And then we can go ahead and place that down. Again, this is about 1 inch from the top using this line, so I like to kind of put the top right at the collar there. And then just make sure that the line is kind of straight on the garment so that it's not like cattywampus, you know? Once you're happy with it, you can press it down nice and firmly. And now we can go ahead and get started with stitching. I've cut off about 6 feet of gold yarn here, and we're going to get started on the stars. And I know a lot of people always say they struggle to thread these needles, but I kind of just like to pinch the yarn in my fingers and thread it through and pull it through. And if it doesn't work, you may have to kind of snip off a clean section and try again. There you go. Now, tips for always embroidering is you always want to make sure that you have a tail on your needle. So we're only going to embroider with one piece of our yarn, but this tail makes sure that our needle doesn't pop off of the yarn while we're embroidering. If it does pop off, you just have to rethread it, so it's just kind of a pain. We're going to get started on this star here, so I'm going to zoom you in. And I'm going to maybe not that close. I'm gonna come up through the back of the sweater now towards the front. And I'm going to start on the inside corner of one of these stars. I'm going to pull that all the way through. Then on the back of the sweater, you want to leave a little tail. This is what you're going to use to tie off later. And I like to hold this in my non-dominant hand while I'm stitching. We're going to start by doing a chain stitch here. And we're going to go down through that same hole we just created and then come up on the line of the star about halfway up that tip. Always put your yarn behind your needle so that when you pull your needle through, sometimes it takes a lot when you have a lot of yarn at the beginning, you get this nice little loop. Now, once you feel a little bit of resistance like that, stop. Don't try to go all hulky on it, just because otherwise you're going to create puckering on the garment. These are very delicate, so once you get resistance, stop. We're just going to keep going now by putting our needle down through the same hole. Make a note that I am within that first loop, and then I'm going to come up on the tip of the star here. Again, my yarn is behind my needle so that when I pull this through, I get a nice little loop. And now we can go ahead and stitch down our design, just poking that down through the same hole, maybe even a little bit above it to create a sharp point on our star. And again, stopping with any resistance. I would rather you under tighten than over tighten, because you can correct it being loose later on, but you can't correct for it being over tight. We're next going to come back through that same hole. Just make sure that you're kind of away from that little knot at the top. Otherwise, you risk kind of pulling your entire embroidery piece back through. I'm going to turn you guys around. I always like to embroider away from me. That's just personal preference though. And now we're going to do 2 stitches this direction on the star. You're going to start to notice a pattern and this will become easier. But again, going down through that same hole. Notice how I'm on the line of that star. And pull that through. I'm making these stitches super, super small, maybe about like 1/8 of an inch, 1/2 centimeter maybe. The smaller the better in my opinion. So I'm going to do 2 stitches up, 2 stitches down, and then turn my garment. So now I'm facing away from me towards that point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle to the right in that same hole facing this next direction. And I'm just going to continue that pattern, doing 2 up, stop, 2 back, turn all the way around until you get back here. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we have gone all the way around our star, but I've only done 1 stitch here going down into the next one. To finish off this star and make it a completed look, I like to take the eye of my needle and I like to feed it under that first chain stitch we did. Pull that through. And then you're going to start like you would a normal chain stitch. And pull that through. If you can't do this or it's a little too confusing, it's really not that big of a deal. I just find it kind of ties out the star really well. And then to finish this off, I'm just going to kind of poke my needle down into the star right at the base there and pull that through. So you should have completed the outline now, and you may notice you have just a little bit of the inside we need to fill in. So I'm going to do kind of a lazy daisy stitch all the way in the middle here. So I'm going to start in the middle, poking my needle up. This is especially important if you've resized the template and it's a little bigger than the standard one. Most of these stars are about 1 inch wide. And you're just going to make little lazy daisies, which is exactly what we've been doing. Going down through that same hole. And I like to come up just right below all the other yarn. It may get a little hard in here. And then just poke it down. These aren't super important. And if you find you don't have enough space, you can also just do single stitches where you just come up through the center. Like this one over here doesn't really have a lot of space to do a whole chain stitch. So I'm just going to kind of fill in that space by poking my needle down here. It's kind of all just about filling in that space. And I like to always make sure my lines are just going out so it looks like the kind of like rays of a star are all leading outwards, just so it's really nice and symmetrical. So I'm going to go ahead and finish filling these out with either lazy daisies or just those single stitches until it's nice and filled in, and then I'll come back. There you have it. Our star is all filled in. Again, mine isn't perfect, honestly. This is probably not one of my better stars, but honestly, once it's in the whole grand picture, you'll know it's a star. It'll look super cute, and I promise you, no one will notice these little imperfections. Only you notice them. And me in my own garments. So what I like to do now is I like to turn it over, and if you have a lot of excess yarn, just snip it off. We're just going to tie off a triple knot. So I'm going to go over once, and you'll notice I like to go the reverse directions. So I always kind of take this piece, this smaller piece, and go over 3 times. And when it's on the third one, just pull it super tight. Snip the excess, leave about 1/4 of an inch of excess. Just for the first wash, you can always cut these off once you know it's like held intact. But there you have it, a cute little star. Let's get started on our ornament, and I have again about 5 or 6 feet of yarn on my needle here with that tail. So I'm going to go ahead and come up through the back of the garment on the outside of this ornament. We're going to be doing that same chain stitch we did in the star, so poke your needle down through the garment and push it up along the outside of your circle, making sure your yarn is behind your needle. If I didn't mention it before, make sure you're holding a tail on the back with your non-dominant or non-stitching hand so that you can tie it off later. And then you can pull this through. We're going to be doing that same chain stitch all the way around your ornament until you get back to the beginning. So again, down through that same hole, coming up about maybe even smaller than 1/4 of an inch. These are pretty small, and pulling it through. Again, stop once you feel any resistance. I'm going to go through and I'll show you how I finish off this circle so you can't see any gaps. Once you're about 1 chain stitch length away from the beginning of your circle, you're going to want to take the eye of your needle and feed it through that first chain stitch. So feeding it under both of the loops of that first chain stitch and pull that all the way through. And then you're going to push your needle down into that last chain stitch. This is basically a reverse chain stitch, and it just helps complete the circle so that you can't see where you started or ended. It's super pretty. We're now just going to keep doing those concentric circles all the way until we get to the inside. I can usually complete about 3 of these circles until it's fully filled in, but I'll show you how I finish off the center. Just really quick, when I'm going in the concentric circles on the inside, I like to keep it so that when I poke my needle up, I'm about like 1 yarn's width away from the other yarn. That way when I pull it through, I'm perfectly on it and there's no like overlap. I'd rather you have gapping than overlap because you can fix gapping later, but if you overlap your stitches, you're going to start to get that coning effect you see on stitching sometimes. So always do less instead of more. Does that make sense? Make sure you either have gaps instead of overlapping is all I want to say. So I got to the center of my circle and I was able to do 1 stitch here, and I'm just going to try to do 1 more stitch to fill in that gap over there. This is where it gets really, really difficult. Let me zoom you out. If you ever feel it really difficult to pull the needle through, make sure that your sweater isn't like bunched like this. Make sure your sweater is nice and flat and you're pulling it through that way. If it's bunched like that, you're creating too much tension and it's hard to pull it through. So always try to make sure it's nice and flat and you're pulling parallel to your sweater. I think that's good. I was only able to do 2 stitches on the innermost circle, so I'm just going to stitch that down and pull that through. I think that looks super cute. If you ever notice some of these like where it looks a little more heavy on one side, like this loop is a little heavier, you can kind of grab the other side of your chain stitch and pull it through to even them out. There you have it. We can then flip this around and again tie that off with a triple knot just like we did the star and cut off the excess. Now I feel like it wouldn't be an ornament without a little bit of a shine, so I have just a little bit of white yarn here on my needle and I'm just going to poke it up about 3 o'clock on my circle in between that first and second set of chain stitches. Pull that through and then I'm just going to poke it down again in between that first and second set of chain stitches. That way when I pull it through, this kind of follows the curve. You can kind of like poke it into that curve and pull it through a little bit. I just like it because it kind of curves in with your circles when you do it that way. And then just tie this off. But let's come back and do the gold topper. Now I am going to be using some gold thread for the topper of this ornament. I tried a lot of yarns and the gold thread just really made it look more like an ornament than the yarn did. But I will leave my favorite yarn here down below so you could do it with yarn as well if you don't love gold thread, because it is kind of hard to work with. If you're going to be doing the yarn, you're going to be doing the same technique. You'll probably just have to do a lot less stitches than I will. But I have about 6 feet of this yarn, this gold thread threaded on my needle. I am going to use the same needle. Always use a big needle when you're doing metallic thread, but let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be doing satin stitches along the top, following this little topper mark I have here. And if you've never done a satin stitch, we're just going to start by coming up through one of the sides and try to keep it really, really close to the ornament base. Just like all of our other stitches, leave a tail on the back to tie off with later. And we're just going to go down on the other side. Usually I would do this in one motion, but since gold thread is so finicky, I'm going to do this in 2 separate motions so that I don't destroy the thread. We're just going to keep doing the same pattern, coming up on the left and back down on the right. If you kind of like skip some spaces, that actually works better, so you can go back and fill them in later. But I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing this, and I'll show you what it looks like and how many stitches it took to do that when I finish. Okay. I did about 8 back and forth stitches here to get this one, and now we're just going to do a tiny little loop on the top. So I'm just going to do back stitch for this and then a whipped back stitch. So I'm going to pull this first one up and then go down, kind of aiming towards under those first satin stitches. And I'm going to do one more stitch over here, kind of just a little bit above the satin stitches. You could also just do a full loop, and you can also just avoid this part altogether if you really don't care about it. I just thought it made it look just a little bit like that ornament without going too high over. And then we're just going to come up and we're going to do a whipped back stitch. And to do that, I'm just going to thread my needle under these stitches. Again, this part really isn't super important if you don't want to do it, but I just thought it looked cute. So I'm going to do it. So I'm going to thread 1 under and then 2 under. Then I'm just going to poke that needle back down and show you what that looks like. Don't pull too tight or you're going to ruin your kind of hook effect. But there you go. I think it kind of just looks like a little bit of an ornament hook, just adds that cute touch. If you want to do a full loop, you totally could. You could just do kind of like a detached chain stitch. But if you're going to do this with yarn, just do a few satin stitches here, and I think that will look super cute like an ornament. Either way, you're going to tie this off as many times as possible and then thread it underneath. So I'm going to show you how I did that. So I tied my triple knot. I actually tied 5 knots, and then I just snipped my threads to be the same size. And I'm just going to thread both of these on here, and I'm just going to go back and forth on this garment back just a little bit, just because metallic thread can be so difficult to stay. I really want to give this a fighting effort. And I know someone in the comments always says, like, isn't that itchy? I always have my kids wear like a tank top underneath these or a t-shirt, so that 1, they can't feel the stitches, but 2, it really extends the life of the garment because they're not wearing it as much, so I don't have to like wash it as much. But there you go, cute little ornament. We're going to get started on our present next, and again I have 6 feet of my white yarn here on my thread, making sure I have that tail. And I'm going to zoom you in. We're going to start on the outside of this present on the line. It doesn't matter where on the line, just make sure you're not on a corner. And pull that through, again making sure you have that tail, and hold it with your non-dominant hand. We're again just going to do a chain stitch. I find I can fit about 4 chain stitches on the outsides of these presents. So since I started on the middle, I'm going to aim for 2. When I'm getting close to the corners, I want to make sure that my last chain stitch finishes exactly on that corner, and I'll show you why. We're going to pull that through, and then to create the nice sharp point of our present, I'm going to push my needle down into that same exact corner. Again, aiming more for the corner so that it looks like a nice sharp point. Similar with the stars. And then when I come up to start on the next side, I want to make sure I'm as close as possible to that top knot without hitting it. It can sometimes be a little tricky, but it'll be worth it. And then we're going to just continue that process of 4 stitches, push it down, come back up, 4 stitches all the way around, and then we're going to finish it off with a continuous chain, just like we did on the ornament. But I'll show you how to finish the inside of this almost said pretzel, the inside of this present, because it's a little bit different than the circle. So go ahead and finish that off as you did. So I finished off my present with the 4 stitches on the outside, and then to do the inside, I'm going to start in the corner this time, and I'm going to do the same exact thing, aiming for 3 stitches. So I finished off the outline of my present, and now I'm going to come up on the inside to do the kind of concentric circles like we did on the ornament, but this time I'm going to aim for the corners, and I'm going to do the same thing, but with about 3 or 2 chain stitches, depending on how much it takes to get across. And every time you get to the corner, again, do that same thing where you snip it in the corner. This time aim really close to that. I'll show you when I get to it. So once I finish off those 3 chain stitches, I'm again just going to kind of aim for that corner, just because if you don't, it really kind of looks like a lot of gapping. So, and again, if you have some of these weird pieces where your chain stitch falls over a bit, you can just pull them. They're pretty malleable. And then we're just going to finish that off, and then the center, I'll show you what I do. To finish off that last stitch, you're going to do the exact same thing as we did the star, where you kind of come under that first stitch, pull it through, and then finish off your chain stitch just like you would, except you're going to poke it down into that corner just like we have been doing. And then to finish off the center, I just do 2 chain stitches in alternate directions. So I'm going to do one coming up here and going across, and then one starting here and coming over. So just like that, coming across, or you could even do satin stitches in here, just anything to fill in that space. I just find chain stitches kind of fill in like 2 for 1. For every stitch you do, you kind of get 2 pieces of yarn coming over. So again, we're just going to do one kind of going the opposite direction, and then we'll see how that looks and see if we need to fill in any more. Sorry, I'm going a little quickly here just because I feel like you already know how to do the chain stitch. We're just kind of filling it in at this point. And kind of just take a look at how that's looking. I think that's super cute. We're also going to be putting like a ribbon over this, so I'm not super concerned about how the middle looks because it does get pretty covered, but there you have it. To do the bow of the present, I have about 3 feet of a dark blue yarn. I tried a lot of different colors, and this is the best one I found to just tie in with the Christmas spirit without being too out there. We're going to start by coming up in the center of all of these kind of like flower bow loops. We're going to pull that through, and we're just going to do detached chain stitches. There is a dot on these, but it might be hard to see, so just kind of aim for the outermost point of that first loop and pull it through, and then stitch it down. Again, we're doing like the same stitch pretty much, and then I'm going to complete all 3 and then show you how to do the crisscross. Now this may be where the marker comes in handy, because you're kind of want to see where the previous lines were on the bottom. So you can either kind of mark these out with your marker just to make sure they look even before going for it, or just kind of play it by ear. I like to notice that since we did 2 chain stitches, it's always going to kind of be right where those 2 chain stitches like meet, and then same here on the bottom, and that is pretty much perfectly in center. So I'm going to zoom you back out, and we're just going to do 2 satin stitches across this. So I'm going to come up through one of these corners. I like to kind of peel back the yarn with my thumb just so I get super close without grabbing any white yarn. So see that? So I'm just going to pull that up and then stitch it down on the other side, again kind of pulling it in so I get nice and close. The only issue with this is really try not to pull it too tightly. Stop once you feel any resistance. This one's kind of bugging me. I might come back and stitch that down. But then we're just going to finish off the last stitch and tie this off with a triple knot, and there you have it. That through. Cute, right? Again, I only have about 4 feet of yarn here on my needle, leaving that tail, and we're going to do a super cute zigzag tree. Now this may be a little hard to see here, so I'm going to fix this on the final pattern, but we're basically just going to go back and forth creating little zigzag stitches. So I'm going to start at the bottom right, which is where all of the tree stitches start. I'm going to poke my needle up through the corner. And just like the present, we're just going to go and do little satin stitches. So I'm going to go across here and pull that through. And then I'm going to come up through the next zigzag. Pull that through. And then come down through here. And I'm just going to complete that until I get to the top of the Christmas tree. Now, something fun you could do is come in with different colors and do the same pattern going over it to really fluff up the Christmas tree, but I just wanted to show a simple stitch here. Now, I'm also going to show you how you could add little ornaments to your tree to really fluff it out, but for now, I'm just going to add a star to the top of my tree. I really just have like 1 foot of yarn here, and I'm just going to pop it up on the top of the Christmas tree. You can do a French knot here, but I find those a little difficult to get to stay on wearables. So all I'm going to do is tie 2 knots here on top of each other, pull that through so I have a nice little ball, and then I'm going to stick it down in a different hole to the one I previously came up from. Pull that through and then take the other yarn on the inside and pull that through. And then you get a cute little topper. I might have to go through and fix some of these templates to be a little more even now that I'm stitching it out. So these will be fixed for you guys. These are a little crowded here, but I promise you for you guys, it will be perfect. Mine is a little crowded here. I'm also just going to add a little tree here with a little trunk here with brown, just doing a simple satin stitch. So coming up and going down maybe 1 or 2 times. But again, mine's a little crowded, yours will be better. But there you have it. You now have all of these stitches you need to do your Christmas tree design, so you can go off and have fun with this design and then come back when you're finished so we can figure out how to get this sulky paper off together. If you're feeling a little adventurous and you want to try out a more difficult stitch, this is called the long and short stitch, or at least my variation of it, and it gives this really cool effect of kind of like a real Christmas tree, and it's really soft and plushy, and I think it looks really, really cute on these, and it kind of fills this out. So let's learn it together. I have just like one of my practice sweaters here, so please try not to judge it. And I have about 6 feet of my green yarn on my needle, and I'm going to start with the bottom of the tree. Now, since this is long and short, there's not really a good like template to do for this because you are kind of just figuring out the stitches as you go, but I'm just going to kind of give you my 2 cents of how I do this stitch. What I like to do is I like to start at the bottom of my tree, and you're not going to want to follow the line at the bottom. You're just going to use this as a base template for putting your stitches on top. If you notice on the one I did here, all the stitches on the bottom are kind of at differing lengths, and that really gives it the effect of a real Christmas tree. So I just like to start by pulling this up, and these are kind of like satin stitches, but where you don't really have a rhyme or reason to going down. So I'm just going to honestly start doing some random stitches on the bottom half of my tree, and I'm going to want to make sure that all of them are differing lengths. So again, there's not really a rhyme or reason to this. I'm just going to kind of show you how I stitch a few of these and how I kind of want it to look, and you can kind of go for there. Again, as you can see, if you've ever done like, probably not, like flooring on like a wood floor, where you want to make sure that they don't line up at the end, you want to make sure they're all differing lengths, which is really hard as a human because we have a hard time not doing patterns. It's a true story. Even like me here, I'm creating some of these on the line when I shouldn't. I should probably put some of these a little further down. And I'm just going to kind of show you how I begin to fill these in. So maybe a smaller stitch here, come over here. Okay, I think you get that effect. Fill in the bottom like half of your tree doing these stitches, and then we'll come back. Okay, I filled in most of the bottom half of my tree, and now I'm gonna start encroaching towards the top. And when I come down to do this next layer, I wanna make sure that all of my stitches kind of overlap the yarn on the bottom. And I'm going to kind of do this in 3 layers, but the top layer is going to be very, very short here. So again, we're just gonna kind of start doing some stitches, always kind of going towards that center piece so it looks like it fans out. And again, there's really no rhyme or reason to this. I kind of just want to show you my thought process when I'm putting stitches down. The good thing about this stitch is you can honestly just like keep going. The more the merrier. So see how I'm kind of overlapping that stitch so I don't see any kind of sweater when I go through it. Once you get to this point, you can start doing the tip of the tree. And again, I'm going to go right down in the center. And I want to make sure that all of the middle of my tree is filled in. So again, making sure all of my stitches kind of line up. I'm noticing kind of like that stitch over there is showing, so I want to make sure I hide that. Let's push that down and see where we're at. Okay, that's looking really cute. I do want to add like a few stitches off to the sides, and we're just going to do this entire thing in real time because it is one of those stitches where you just got to kind of go for it and just try it out. I'm just going to kind of add a few poking off to the side just so it looks a little fluffier. And I'm going to poke those right in so it looks like those branches are kind of coming off the tree. Yeah, that's cute. Maybe I'll do it just a few down the side. Again, like I said, this is a cool one because it's not like you can go too far overboard. The more you add, the fluffier it gets. And if you start to notice, like I'm starting to notice kind of these stitches up here aren't really covered, let's just go in, just add some more stitches. There's no rhyme or reason to this one. That could be good or bad for some people. I think this one is really cute because you can add ornaments at the end and it'll look super put together. Like maybe I kind of want to add one there. Fill it in a little bit more. Let's add one on the left side. I feel like we've been ignoring that left side. Maybe one right here and come over. Okay. Let's call that good. You can also kind of like put your needle under and fluff up some of these stitches if you kind of pushed them down too far. Maybe that last stitch was a little wonky. I can always just cover it with an ornament or another stitch. You know what? Again, this one's fun because it's just you and the stitches. Yeah, much better. Okay, I think that's super cute, so let's stop before I overdo it. Again, once you add the little stem and some ornaments, it'll look super cute. So let's go add the stem. Because I know someone's going to ask, this is what the inside looks like, kind of just like a reverse of the tree. It's really not bad, and you're just going to have one knot on top. So if you start to add ornaments on it, it is going to be a little messy. Let me show you this one. I added a lot of ornaments on this one, so it's pretty chaotic, but you know what? They're only young ones, so let's have some fun. To add a stem to this, we are just going to use the guide on the stitch here, on the pattern here, and poke it up right at the bottom of that. But I actually like to come up on top of the tree a little bit, maybe like 1/4 of an inch up. I just think it looks really cute and whimsical that way, like it's a real tree. And then just tie this off, and then I'll show you how to do the ornaments. If you're planning on doing like 2 ornaments, then I would suggest a colonial knot. and I just have about a foot of yarn here on my needle. To do a colonial knot, you're just going to come up through the tree, and it might be really hard because now you have a lot of yarn on this tree. You're going to pull that through, and to do the colonial knot, you're going to wrap your needle under. Let me zoom you in just a little bit. Okay, so wrap it under. I like to put my finger here and then wrap it over. And then I pull that down with my forefinger, my pointer finger, and then on the back I'm holding this yarn taut so it's nice and tight, and then I'm just going to poke my needle down through the garment, keeping all that tension. And once you kind of get to this point, you can release some of the tension, otherwise it might be way too hard to pull through. There you go. And there you go, a little colonial knot. This is a good technique because you don't have to tie off each individual ornament if you're going to do it this way. If you're just going to do one ornament, you can do my like modified French knot technique. But note that you do have to tie off every single one of those when you do that technique. Whereas this colonial knot, you can do as many as you want and it won't create any like puckering on the back. So again, I did that technique. I'm just going to poke my needle down in. Kind of release that tension once I get here. You might have to wiggle it a little bit and pull it through. How cute are those? And then I am going to show you the back. Notice how I was able to do 2 ornaments and I don't have to tie those off individually. So that is the benefit of a colonial knot, but it is a little harder to do. I prefer the colonial knot over French knots. I just find they hold up a little better on wearables. So that's why I teach that. But yeah, there you have it. I did 2 different colors on this tree. I thought it gave it some good dimension, but there you go. Now you can either rinse this off in the sink with cold water, or you can throw it in the washer on a cold, delicate cycle, which is what I like to do. If you noticed any crunchiness, that means it's not rinsed off, and rinse it off again. Once it comes out of the washer, I want you to immediately place it down on a flat surface. Your garment will probably be a little bit wetter than you would assume it would be, but I like to go through and kind of just make sure everything lays flat and is nice and straight. I will sometimes even like straighten out some of these lines. This is a version of blocking. You shouldn't have to do this every single time, but the first time it is really important. Either way, I had so much fun making these with you guys. I hope you try this. If you like this video, please make sure to like, comment, and follow me. It really helps out the algorithm. If I haven't told you this today, thank you so much for supporting me. I love you guys, and have a good rest of your day. Happy stitching, everyone.